We are already halfway through the third season of this podcast, and I hope you're having as much fun listening to it as I am creating the episodes. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can find the links to our GoFundMe and Buy Me a Coffee in the episode description. Another way that you could show your support that is completely free is by sharing this episode with a friend or posting about it on your social media, as well as rating the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to. This allows us to reach more and more amazing people. This podcast is truly a labor of love, so any support that you can show us would be absolutely appreciated. Welcome to The Wheelchair Activist, a podcast hosted by me, Emma Vogelman, and every month I interview amazing members and allies of the disabled community who are quite literally changing the world. Lucy, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of The Wheelchair Activist. I can't imagine that there are many people listening to this who don't know who you are, but for our lovely listeners, could you please introduce yourself?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I am so honoured to be a part of your podcast. I know you've been doing it for like 3 seasons now, so that's super cool. My name's Lucy Edwards. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a broadcaster and I'm a journalist. I'm a content creator, but also I'm now an entrepreneur. So we can chat loads more about that. But yeah, primarily I started as a BBC journalist after kind of making YouTube videos and finding my voice online. And then during the pandemic, obviously a word we all don't really like to talk about. It's like, oh my gosh, that really happened. Yeah, I started uploading on TikTok, and then yeah, my business was formed, and now me and my husband own our own business, and that was kind of a whirlwind. And yeah, we consult with brands every day on how to be more accessible, but also front campaigns. I super love my job, and I've got my gorgeous retired guide dog, Miss Olga, next to me, and obviously everyone knows Miss Molly. So yeah, live with my 2 dogs and my hubby.
Oh, thank you so much for all that. I mean, I got where to start with all of your amazing endeavors. I think for me, I feel like you absolutely fall into this category of disabled people that I probably feel like I know, but we've never actually had a proper conversation, I don't think. So I am so excited to be chatting with you. And I think when I think of you and the work that you do, I absolutely think of you as like a content creator and activist, and think that the work that you do around that is so interesting. But your point around, being a person who fronts campaigns is getting so much more popular. I don't know if it feels that way for you, but I'm just sort of seeing you absolutely everywhere, but quite rightly deserved. But I have to ask you about Barbie because that's probably where a lot of people will know you from. Can you tell us about your experience working with Barbie?
Absolutely. Oh, where to begin? I think, doing content creation every day is the biggest honor that people want to watch me. And thank you so much that you're just flying the flag for disability. I absolutely adore your podcast. And I think, we all have to stick together in this community. We're few and far between, but also there's lots of us. But it's amazing understanding that there's now a blind Barbie in the world. It blows my mind. A few months back, my management team got a call, and lovely Katrina was like, Luce, are you sitting down? Like, sit down for me to give you this news. And I'm like, okay, this is a big one. And she said, yeah, Mattel want you to be the face of blind Barbie. And I think calls like that you can't prepare for. You just
Yeah.
feel so like, oh, me? What? Little old me from UK, from Birmingham? Like, I don't, it's so weird. Yeah, but also I think that one was particularly emotional for me. I think the conversation I've also had like that is when, my lovely friend Sam Latif, who's the disability lead at Procter and Gamble, said, Lucy, you sitting down, and that she said, do you want to be the face of Pantene? Like that, had two calls like that in my career, which I'm just so thankful. Just pinch me, I'm dreaming. I think with Barbie, it really aligns with my why. And I always talk about this in psychology, and I'm so open about having psychology and talking to a psychologist. And she says, like, Lucy, do you align with your values? You know, I always talk about my core value system, and my why is every day I get up, I'm thinking about the little Lucys out there that didn't have representation. You know, I didn't, when I was younger, I used to type in the word blindness and nothing came up other than me. And shout out to lovely Molly Burke, because
Oh, we
she
love
was
her.
also, yeah, she was starting her channel at a really similar time to me, actually. So I feel like we've grown up together, but on the other sides of the planet. I feel
Yeah.
like she is the Canadian me and I am the UK her. But yeah, Barbie is a massive thing. She's got heels, and the campaign, I mean, I don't know the complete statistics, but it must be at least 1 billion views worldwide we got that day. And honestly, I nearly lost my voice because I was on back-to-back like calls for the press all day, but I was just beaming from ear
Wow.
to ear, to be honest. So yeah.
I mean, it's incredible. I mean, first, I feel like I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't challenge that. Yeah, luck may come into it, but you've also worked incredibly hard to get yourself out there and to be vulnerable and to make content about disability, which I know is not always easy. And you have to talk about sometimes very intimate things and very vulnerable things and sort of address the insecurities around disability. And I don't know if this resonates with you, but I think people can maybe think that that's easier than it actually is at
Yeah.
times. Like
Oh my
I,
gosh. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we put ourselves out there because, first of all, we love what we do. Same as you, I really love all of the work that I do, both in my like 9 to 5 and then outside of that as well. And it matters so much to me, but it's not easy to talk about, really intimate parts of your life or to talk about the things that you can't do or negative experiences that you've had. So I do need to say that I don't think it's all luck. I think it's a huge amount to do with this community that you have built online and this persona that you have created in your content. So I have to say that. But I
Mm.
also think with Barbie, I mean, first, were you a Barbie kid when you were a kid?
Totally. I had this little Barbie Jeep that I had a remote controller for, and I would like, my cats would run away from it. And I'd just sit Barbie in it. And I swear I used to drive too fast with it. I used to be a sighted little girl until I was 17. But yeah, I love her. And thank you so much for talking about, I think it's hard, isn't it? Like when there's something so positive that is happening, I think it's so important to always just remember, you know, what it's taken to get you here. And I think sometimes I fall foul of like doing that. Like I'm so positive and I just always want to hit people with positivity, because my life overall, now that I've adapted to being Blind Lucy, is so, so positive. And I think also, people don't believe that necessarily. I guess there's still stereotypes that run true that blindness is a positive thing, but I don't, when I live every day, I don't think, oh my gosh, I need fixing, or oh my gosh, I wish I had my eyesight back, because that would just be futile. But I think it's understanding that, oh my gosh, I've been online for 10 years now, and the Lucy that was staring back at the camera, 10 years ago was very, very ill, and struggled to talk about her feelings and struggled to understand what was happening to her, and felt frightened and worried about public perceptions of disability. And I think at that point, that's when I just wanted to find a community. But I think when I started my TikTok and short form video came kind of front and center, I think that's when I got the confidence to be like, well, these questions in my mind are possibly, well, are very silly sometimes when people ask me how I pour a glass of water, like just objectively for me,
Yeah.
that's like, oh my gosh, that's something I do every single day. But I also then am aware that, someone that is a question that someone's asking for the very first time. And when I first acquired my disability, I had to learn on the job, and I knew nothing about it until I became disabled myself. So I don't know. It's almost like a public service thing I'm doing as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard. It's hard to go to those two mindsets, isn't it? But thank you so much for acknowledging that.
No, of course. I think, it's so difficult. And I find this as a content creator. And so it's something I've been thinking about a lot, sort of as, I'm going to be like revamping my website and sort of thinking about the type of content and stuff that I want to create. And I'm thinking, how do I tread this line of positivity, but not to the point where you're painting a non-authentic picture
Yeah.
of what being disabled looks like? Because, and I love your slogan that, is on your website and on your socials, blind, not broken. And I think that that's really powerful. But I think, you also want to acknowledge that as much as you may see yourself that way, there are very real people in the world who do have misconceptions of what it means to be blind, what it means to be disabled. And we also experience that, I imagine same as you, almost every time that you leave the house, you'll, encounter some sort of barrier that society's
Mm.
put in place for you, or, some shitty attitude from someone. And it's how do you make that side of being disabled visible in a challenge public perception kind of
Mm.
way?
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. 9 times out of 10, I order a taxi and I can't get in it because I get a guide dog refusal. Like, knowing
Mm,
those things are hard and they can weigh down on you. But I saw a LinkedIn post by someone that I really admire called Holly Took, and she's an RNIB social media officer. Holly's been creating on Life of a Blind Girl for as long as I have been doing my channels, and I really admire what she said. She said, look, I can't fight every single bit of discrimination that I have. I can't, write to my manager or write to the company. Like, I cannot physically do that because I would be writing a letter every day. And the
yeah.
amount of spoons, and which is spoon theory, it's part of how I describe my energy levels per day. The amount of energy that would take me to do that, like, would take away from all the joy that I have in my life. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen, and it doesn't mean it's not there. But I think, when I first lost my eyesight, I would take every single refusal so hard, but I would be
Mm,
carrying this cloud around with me every day. I would feel like, just even picking my foot up and just walking one foot in front of the other, I just felt so weighed down and miserable. And I think I've got gorgeous supportive family, but also knowing that fighting fire with fire or rage with rage, it just makes the whole world go up in flames. And
mm,
I think people might think, oh, she's so positive all the time. No, there are those moments where I am, I have my pleasant place and I have my tactile pillows and I have my psychologist and I have all of these things that make me me. But I have to understand that I cannot give all of these people in my comment section and in real life who refuse me in my guide dog Miss Molly the key to my mind. And it's about trying to shut them away, and that is hard to do. Don't get me wrong, if you are listening to this right now and you've just acquired your disability, or you're losing different parts of, you don't recognize yourself in some way, I have been there, and it's taken me a long time to try and compartmentalize these different feelings. But I think now I can do that, and I'm able to do that. It's opened up this world for me that I know my mind more than I probably ever would have if I hadn't have
mm,
lost my vision. And this is why I say I'm blind, not broken, because I genuinely do not feel broken. Like, my disability has given me so many things, and I just get so much of a better response, especially online. If you do comedic videos, if you do videos that are like,
mm.
this is not ideal, but if I came on and cried, which absolutely you should do that as well, that should be a part of if you feel compelled to do that, I'm not judging you at all. But I think for me, putting positivity out there, even when I feel crummy, just makes me feel better. I hope that makes sense.
No, it completely does. And I think what I love about your content, and Molly Burke does this as well, is sort of like have that humor, have that comedy side of like, Molly Burke has like blind girl moments. And it's like, oh, I just did this really funny, stupid thing that, I as a blind person experience. And like, it's okay to laugh at that, but like you're in on the joke, you are controlling the narrative, and it's still really educational for, the types of experiences that people have with all different impairments. Like, I've definitely poked fun at myself, as a wheelchair user, and friends have as well, but like always in a way that is obviously not offensive and not poking fun in a negative, trying to belittle you kind of way, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think when you can control the narrative, I think that's what's so amazing that a lot of people, I don't know whether you've found this, but I speak to lots of people and they're like, we're so glad that we have social media because we just feel so much more seen and heard. And
Yeah.
being our own producers, editors, directors, uploaders, like it's hard, but at least we're controlling the narrative finally on how we're portrayed because, inspiration porn in the traditional media, I remember when I first did my first day at the BBC as a journalist, like the amount of people that I would educate on the words, it's just so offensive. Different words that are still used, like wheelchair bound. I just hate. Oh gosh, it
Mm,
just makes my skin crawl. And obviously, they didn't necessarily know why it was offensive, but it's about, finding it in yourself to educate that person over and above, I guess, your feelings about it for the greater good. And that is tiring, as you said at the start of the podcast. Like, I think it's a special type of kind of energy that you have to kind of keep digging into. So yeah, yeah, I admire us all. I think we're all brilliant.
I mean, I have to agree. I think, putting yourself out there, and I think, what you were saying before about Barbie, you were thinking about Little Lucy. It's something I think a lot about with this podcast and the types of people that I have on, because I'm thinking, what are the types of people that little Emma would have potentially wanted to see or hear about? But even if, as little Emma, I've always had my disability. I've always been a wheelchair user, but I really didn't identify as being disabled for a very, very long time, not till my early 20s. But I do think, well, what if I had seen disabled people in the types of fields that I was interested in? Would my relationship with disability be different than it was? As a kid, I was really interested in theater. I was interested in journalism. I was interested in like performing. And if I had seen more disabled people in those spaces, maybe I would have felt differently about identifying with it, because it felt very, very foreign to the type of life that I was thinking of, having for myself, which is, strange when you think about it, because I always knew that I was going to be a wheelchair user and all that, but there just wasn't that representation for it to even start to fit in with, when you're a kid thinking about what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to be? And I think it's so amazing that not only are you doing that through your content, but as being the face of Blind Barbie. Like, there are kids who are visually impaired, there are kids with, any other type of disability who are starting to see themselves in that sphere, and that's incredible.
It's honestly mind blowing. I'm totally with you though, Emma, in terms of, when you think back to our childhood, there was nobody on telly. There was nobody telling you that
Yeah.
it was okay. So you just felt sick, quite frankly. Like I remember thinking about becoming blind and losing my eyesight, and I woke up from those operations so sick to my stomach because no one could tell me that it was going to be okay. And I
Mm,
think that's the point, right? Like I think representation matters. Like, there's so many people that have seen Blind Barbie and think it's so epic. But there's also people questioning like, oh well, why do you need all these different Barbies? the reason that we do is because of people who we used to be, who
Yeah.
we now look back to and think, wow, if only there was something, I would have felt so much more confident. And we've probably, I mean, I look back, I can't speak for you, my love, but I look back and I think, oh my gosh, I wasted so much time hating myself. And I just feel
Yeah.
so sad for me. So
Yeah.
sad for past me.
Because it's all of that. Like, it's society, it's people, it's everyone. Disability is bad, disability is bad, and it's limiting, it's this and it's that. And if you are the type of person, like I suspect you are, and I know that I am, where you have this, well, I'm going to prove you wrong kind of
Yeah.
attitude, then that's great, but not everyone who is disabled needs to, pick up the mantle and to prove the entire world wrong. Exactly what you said about Holly, who she's been on the show before and I absolutely adore her. And the conversation I had with her was so interesting because it was about, well, am I a bad disabled person if I do this? Am I a bad disabled person if I don't do that? So really recommend checking out that episode. But it's so important to think of disability in like your own context, and you don't always have to fight absolutely everything. And some things are more difficult, some things are easier. And I think what you said about the things that you've learned through being disabled are actually, in a lot of ways, like really invaluable.
Mm. Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think you don't have to fight every battle, and knowing that, just because we're both content creators in this sphere, you're probably hearing us right now. You don't have to do that. And I think I've fought with myself over the years, like, oh my gosh, I should say something now, should I, talk to that Uber driver about why they're wrong. And it's like, well,
Mm,
no, actually, I want to fill up my cup with a different thing today. I might be on my way to a meeting or going to pitch a documentary or doing all these different things where I want my energy to be poured more into. And I think it's about saying that that's okay too. Like, not every
yeah,
moment, just because you have a disability, it doesn't mean you are required to educate everybody that you come across.
no,
Sometimes they might not, deserve the education. But I mean, it's hard, isn't it? I think I say that in jest because I've seen myself like be so irritated at all these guide dog refusals I get. I think
mm,
ultimately I'm so glad that I'm able to put out a message of hope and happiness, and can have these like almost shower thought questions answered. But yeah, in my darkest moments, I'm like, well, why do you need to know everything about me? This is so irritating. And
yeah.
so,
I think
there are days where you just want to be like, I don't want to be disabled today, and that is also okay.
100%. I think it's recognizing that the battles or the microaggressions are exhausting, and there's no, like you said, there's absolutely nothing wrong with not wanting to deal with that. And whatever that looks like for you is absolutely okay. But and one thing I'm dying to ask you about, because we've talked a little bit about your content creation, definitely want to come back to that. And of course, being the face of Blind Barbie, but you were also, am I right, the first blind model to participate in the Copenhagen Fashion Week. So tell me about that experience. I mean, if you haven't seen the pictures, go on Lucy's Instagram right now and have a look because they are incredible. But what was that experience like for you?
Just one word, incredible. I think this is what came out of some pro bono work that I did. And this is why I value, working with charities and organizations that have my why. And I'll probably talk about my why and my value system until the cows come home, because it's how like I definitely have like my moral compass that I'm led by. And I try and at least do 10% of my output pro bono. And it's something that's so, close to my heart. And this lovely lady called Anna Cafone, but she runs a charity called Hair and Care, and she's a hairstylist. She actually grew up with her dad losing his vision very gradually, and eventually, becoming registered blind because of retinitis pigmentosa. And he's no longer with us anymore. But she really wanted to just teach girls and women and men, hairstyle techniques. She runs workshops with Hair and Care on how to do your hair when you can't see. And I admire her so much. And we just clicked. And she actually styles hair for Lana Del Rey. And, her imparting all of her knowledge on her workshops is just utterly incredible. So if you haven't checked out Hair and Care, she is just amazing. But I think, Anna and I have this like wider goal of just making fashion way more accessible. And we partnered together to raise awareness of London Fashion Week a few seasons ago, and making the actual experience of watching a fashion runway show more accessible by providing swatches and audio descriptions. And I chatted about that on socials, Hair and Care's, amazing descriptions on that. And then we just wanted to take it one step further, and she was like, Lucy, you've got to walk Copenhagen. And Sinead O'Dwyer, who I walked for, she has a body positive inclusive show. And I just thought, oh, it's just the right fit. And I knew that it was going to be challenging. There were so many different elements to, understanding how to walk a runway with a lovely guide doggy who is used to doing a lot of different things in her day-to-day life, usually just up and down the streets. I think an arbitrary path with loads of blaring music was definitely like one thing that we had to overcome, and it was a bit scary in rehearsals, bless her. There was one point where I was thinking, oh my gosh, like she needs more bacon because we were giving her really high reward treats. But I think ultimately when Miss Molly did it and we got our Vogue shot, we walked around the corner, I finished the runway. I burst into tears because the moment you just feel so happy that finally you're represented. I mean, I could talk about it and cry now, but it means so much to me that we can finally participate and understand what fashion looks are out there, because cultural moments are so shut out to blind people, historically. And it's one step forward, isn't it? That's brilliant, and I'm just so lucky.
Well, this is part of what I wanted to ask you about with fashion. And I'd love, I really hope that you're sort of okay talking about this, but if you'd rather not, then that's absolutely fine as well. But I'm thinking a lot of people will have this assumption that visually impaired or blind people are not necessarily interested or have a passion or a knowledge about things like makeup and fashion. But of course, you do. So, what would you sort of say to that misunderstanding?
I think ultimately we have been portrayed in the media to be that, frumpy blind person with sunglasses, this, that, the other. So, number one, if you think that way, it's probably perpetuated by different things you've seen in the media, which is horrendous. But, it is not the case at all. And I think understanding that just because I lost my vision one day didn't mean that Lucy Edwards like poofed into oblivion. Like, I'm still here. I'm fighting for just to love makeup and fashion every single day, in an accessible way. But what did happen, because society as a whole didn't believe that that was something that I wanted to participate in, every bottle, every product feels the same on the shelves for me still to this day. But it's the case that I want to feel beautiful. And just because I've lost the ability to look in the mirror myself doesn't mean that these things that we do to make ourselves feel great don't apply to me. So texture and fabrics with fashion, just because I don't see the cut of it skimming my body, I feel the cut skimming my body. And wanting different fabrics and textures, and understanding like why designers have done certain things because of the inspirations they've had in their life, or the cultural moments that then dictates on red carpets, and this whole world that you miss out on. Fashion is so it's just such a cultural moment, and it defines so much in our society. Like, to be shut out of that is just utterly horrendous. And I will always love it. And just because I don't necessarily look at, I love color, but I have one rail in my wardrobe that has color on it, and then I know that I have to scan that a bit more with my different apps, because technology is here for me. Like AI is amazing at describing patterns. And then I have one rail that has like black and white on, so I know that if I'm having like a low spoon day, I can still really, really appreciate the textures and fabrics and everything. But I know that I'm matched, and I know that I don't have to scan if I'm, running out the door that day. So I think for me, fashion is a functional thing, but it is also something that I appreciate textures like nothing else. And I think with makeup, it's the same. As I mentioned, like with Pantene, the reason that that was so pivotal in the marketing space is that, we put Navalens codes, which are free codes that you can print onto your product, and you can scan with the Navalens app, free to the end user, of the exact ingredients and what the price is and everything. I hadn't been able to do that for like 9 years at that point. And
Wow.
I think ultimately understanding that the feeling of someone's hair is just as important as the way it looks as well is good.
Yeah.
And I think then just moving on to makeup, for me, I've just secured funding from Estee Lauder and TikTok to start my own brand named Etia.
Oh
Um,
my gosh.
and it's just going to be, I mean, it's amazing, but I think we've got a long way to go in this space, but I'm ready to tackle it head on and, really, really cater for the 15 to 20% of the world's population who actually have a disability, because we deserve representation.
I mean, I'm beyond excited for that makeup line because I just know it's going to be amazing. But I know it's also going to be very mindful. It's going to be very intentional with everything from like design of product and all of that to be really inclusive. And we've talked about fashion on this podcast before, but more from like an adaptive clothing perspective. But I think it's so important what you said about like just because, there are some aspects of fashion that are like less impactful to you now, it doesn't mean that you now no longer care what you look like or how clothes feel on you. And I think, it's so important to think about, with confidence, what the power of wearing something that makes you feel good can have. And that doesn't, just mean what looks good, it's what feels comfortable, it's what, feels right for the occasion, for how you're feeling. There's so much expression that goes into that there's no reason that someone who is visually impaired would not want to use that as a form of expression.
I'm totally with you. I think the main kind of massive display of this for me was my wedding dress. That moment where your husband looks at you and you look at your husband down the aisle, and thinking
Mhm.
about that used to make me feel really sick. But understanding that, yeah, I'm never going to see my wedding dress, that is never going to be a possibility for me. But that statement doesn't have to be upsetting, because the other
Mhm.
things that I get from it, you know, picking the textures and fabrics and all of these different things that went through my head whilst picking it, it is enough just to feel beautiful in something. I am enough. And just having that statement like loud and proud in your head is just so important. And I think it's taken me a long time to really reprogram my internalized ableism with that, and understanding that, oh, looking in the mirror is everything. And, you got to look at yourself before you go outside. And it's like, well, I actually don't. I've adapted
Yeah.
I've adapted my whole life to not have to do that. All of the products that I use, I make sure that with my makeup bag, I use them 3 times in front of my sister, so I know how they apply. So I really do not have to check in a mirror. And I think that
Mm.
does blow people's mind. Like if you have usable vision, like I can understand why that would be so abstract to you. But yeah, it's been my world for like nearly 12 years now. But you're so right. It's about reframing it.
And I think, when you were talking about wedding dresses, I mean, the amount of, YouTubers and, friends, family, all of that, who may talk about a wedding dress looking really beautiful, but it actually is incredibly uncomfortable, or the fabric is, cutting into their skin and all of that. So it's so important to look for those other aspects in a dress that's going to make you feel how you want to on
Yeah.
that day. It's so interesting to think about it from like a completely different perspective. And yeah, absolutely, like you said, not think of it as, oh, how sad that you're never going to see your wedding dress. It's like, well, you still had the wedding, you still felt beautiful, and that's what matters.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head, and it's hard, isn't it? Because so many weddings are about like, I don't know, it's ultimately about love, and I think that's what we have to
Mm,
remember. And it's hard because there's so much culture and tradition and expectation surrounding the word wedding. And I think for us, we just kind of stripped it back and we said, well, what do we want? Yeah.
yeah.
And I think blindness helps me do that a lot in all different aspects of my life. Like it's allowed me to just get to the nitty gritty of like actually how things make me feel. And sometimes I
Mm,
hate it because it's like, oh my gosh, it's exposed something that I just really didn't want to think about right now, but it's done me good in the long run. And yeah, it's so interesting that what disability brings, but ultimately it's made me so much more understanding of other people's worldview, and
mm,
every person in this world is different. And I think that's what the rich tapestry of life kind of gives you, in that I love the fact that, some of my best friends have the completely opposite views to me, but if I hadn't grown up and lost my eyesight, like would it be the case that I can take those on board and just love them for who
mm.
they are? I don't know. So yeah, it's blindness humbles you in so many ways.
Disability does naturally, I think for a lot of people, and I definitely resonate with this, causes you to be more empathetic, even if it's for, life situations that you will never experience, but you can think about a time when you faced a barrier, how that felt, and that start to imagine how that barrier that you don't experience might be impacting this person, because you know that feeling of being stopped, of being discriminated against, of being, felt less than, and all of that. So I do think that it's an incredibly valuable thing that I find a lot of disabled people, I mean, I think especially disabled women have in particular.
Absolutely. Some of my bestest friends, like my bestest friend on the planet, he is trans, and we talk all of the time about, just dysphoria and understanding
Mm.
ourselves now. Like he transitioned at 17 and I lost my eyesight at 17. And I don't know, the parallels that you draw with different people in your life, it's so amazing. It's such a
Yeah.
gift.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I wanted to ask you in your content, you said that, you work with different brands, but one thing that I really love about your content, and this is something I really like in a few different creators, is sort of your review and your take on products, and if they're accessible, if they're, are these actually usable to a blind person or a disabled person. But I want to know, where did this sort of trial of different products and sort of giving recommendations, or, the opposite, like what's the opposite of influencing, de-influencing, people to buy certain products? But I'd love to know more about that.
Yeah, so this is so topical for today because I uploaded something last night. I did a accessibility review of Rare Beauty, which is Selena Gomez's makeup
Oh,
brand.
I will
And
be watching that
yeah,
straight after this.
thank you, honey. Honestly, like I love doing these reviews, and it's resonating with me so hard. Yeah, the way that I kind of started my channels is like, how does a blind girl do her own makeup? And understanding that, like, all these products don't fit us all equally, disability or not. I think my love for it just kind of stems from, understanding that the kind of more that I lost my eyesight, or the more that I kind of leaned into just truly having a disability, I think the world is definitely becoming more and more accessible. So I think one element is like a lot more products are being developed for people like me, which is just super cool. And I think just to show the world that like there is a demand and that we are here. And I think universal design as well is just super cool to shout from the rooftops about, because it's not just about blindness, it's about all disabilities and all genders and all ages, and designing from the ground up and understanding that you do need a disabled person at a seat around your table. And I think as the movement of Nothing About Us Without Us kind of grew, I wanted to kind of put my mark on it. And I've always loved beauty, as we've said. And I don't know, I find that people, even without blindness, get a lot of value in understanding my opinion and kind of get a different love for their product, and a new dimension of like why something is valuable and how different people value different things. So yeah, I just love doing it. And I think it also shows just my vulnerability in that I don't have to say everything's great all the time, even though I do
Yeah.
ads. Ads are a core part of how I make my money, but I don't do an ad unless it aligns with my personal brand, or if it's truly accessible, or if I'm working behind the scenes with a brand to make them more accessible. So yeah, it's just cool.
Has there ever been a time, obviously been not naming names or anything, but has there ever been a time where you've thought this brand clearly is only working with me because they want me to be some sort of poster child for blindness or for disability?
Absolutely. There's times when brands have invited me to events and I'm like, well, I don't see any representation otherwise other than literally inviting me there. I'm like, no, thanks. And we politely decline, but also tell them why. I think that's really important, understanding why. And I think ultimately, in all different verticals, though, like I wouldn't be able to
Mm,
say to you, oh, yeah, it's just the fashion industry or it's just the makeup industry. It's like, I do decline a lot.
that's
Or
interesting.
Katrina will just be like, who's my manager? Luz, I totally understand why. Like, she brings me everything that comes in my inbox. Like, I trust her so, so much. And understanding that the relationships between your management as well is super important. I went through kind of a
Mm,
time where I didn't have the right team for a couple of years, and that made me feel really ill too. So I think it's trial and error with everything, and understanding that this career is ultimately quite new to
yeah.
society, but also me. Like when I blew up in 2020, I did not know how to do things on social media. And yeah, being humble about that too.
Are there any industries that have like surprised you with like that they genuinely want to be better or yeah, anything that's surprised you about a brand or a company or an industry that people may assume is not caring?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think ultimately what has really worked, it doesn't necessarily surprise me because this is what I advocate for. But when I did work with Pantene, the
Mm,
briefs that came to me, like there was a time where, and it still happens, that briefs that brands give you on, what to say, what do's and don'ts to say when you're obviously advertising the product. The more prescriptive that is, obviously there's got to be some do's and don'ts, but the more prescriptive that is about like what exactly you should say, in my experience, the worse the video does, because it's so much more
mm,
advertisery. And in this era of authenticity, it's kind of the brands that do that and don't budge and don't kind of take my opinion of what I feel my audience is going to kind of get from that doesn't then end up performing well. I know that this is probably an obvious top line for me, but like Pantene, when we also had that consultancy element on the contract, and this is what brands are doing more and more with me, knowing that, you know, consulting with me will then make their products more accessible, and then in turn it not just be like a tokenistic
mm,
representation. Having Sam, who is also blind, internally as the disability lead for Pantene, made things happen so much quicker with the actual product. And also because we're working externally and internally on different things, I think I just had a greater kind of ability to push things with the campaign through with her support. And it then in turn was not a tokenistic kind of portrayal of disability. And yeah.
I mean, that sort of brings me to what I was going to ask you, sort of where does the line, or is there a line, I guess, between your role as an influencer, but then also as a consultant? Are you finding that, people are more interested in consulting with you as opposed to just, can you promote this product?
Absolutely. I would say most contracts now have some sort of consultancy element. And if there isn't, sometimes, when I'm posting a bit of content, they ask me about the copy of audio description that's going out, or, you know, are the captions okay? Or these different elements of the social media posts that we're posting. And then I'm
Yeah,
like, oh my gosh, well, that crosses over into consultancy. So I think there's always a nod to that, even if it's not in the contract. And then kind of, I guess the question always kind of comes in that, like, getting it written in is really important. I think if you're starting out on social media and don't have that written in, I think it's a must. Definitely just on bigger contracts, yeah.
yeah, because I can imagine, you putting, a lot of thought and a lot of time into something and wanting to actually make the product or the service or whatever it is better and more inclusive. But then they also need to, pay you for that because you're bringing in an expertise. I always compare it to, okay, well, if you need a website designed, you're going to pay a web designer to, to build it because that's a skill and a perspective that you don't have. So why
Mm.
is disability different?
Absolutely. The amount of kind of surveys that you get sent, and it's like, fill out this and you might get a voucher. It's like,
Mm,
no, pay disabled people properly for their opinions, thoughts, and feelings, because that will then determine how you change your product for the better. And then probably earn you quite a lot of press for that. Like if you design for
yeah.
people with disabilities, like Blind Barbie went insane. It was incredible. But that's because it's a world first. And I think people need to understand like the gravitas in that if you are going to start designing for people with disabilities, it is a responsibility, just like, being ethical is and sustainable and all of these different taglines. We just want to do everything
Mm.
properly. That shouldn't dissuade you, of course, but I think, yeah, there's a lot of tokenism out there.
Maybe less so now with your team around you, but do you find that there are a lot of people or brands or companies trying to get kind of free advice?
Um, yeah, as I say, like I think because my team are supportive in I inevitably do get that, but I just don't see
Mm.
it. I don't think Katrina bats it away for me, which I'm very, very lucky to have.
The more you talk about her, the more I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm so glad I got through.
Yeah, oh, bless you. No, honestly, like I think that's where, she always tells me about everything, all the
Mm,
opportunities, like good and bad. And anything that comes in my inbox, she is so transparent with me, which, hasn't been the case before with different people. And I think it's so important to, work with a person that is so on your level and so understands you, because this, like my personal brand is so like it filters so much into my real life as well. I
mm,
film in my home and I do have to set my own boundaries, but sometimes they do blur. Like where does home Lucy start and personal brand begin? It's very blurry some of the time, like even more so in some scenarios. And I'm happy with that, but I think it's about setting those boundaries. But also with yourself, I think it's understanding that, you know, my why is still there, and loving your
mm,
podcast and listening to your podcast no matter whether, I'm doing a red carpet on Monday, which I am, or, doing a brand deal. I haven't stopped being Lucy. Like I still
mm.
want to talk to you because we have the same value system. We understand, that we want to get our message out there.
I mean, that was another thing that I struggle with, as not necessarily in the content creation space, although definitely to some extent, but in sort of the personal activism, and when your purpose is so closely aligned with who you are, it's so difficult to draw those lines because remember when I was on like more forms of social media than I am now, thinking particularly about Twitter. If I saw something, from another disabled person who maybe I needed advice, or I thought, oh, I could signpost them to something, or I could try and give advice, or, there's so many things that I think creep into our everyday activities that could then turn into, I don't want to say work, but kind of, in the
No, I'm
workspace.
I'm totally with you. I think this is the thing. If you align with your value system, it doesn't matter whether you're being paid or not to give that advice because you are you, but you are also the work. By saying
Mm,
this, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be paid. We so totally should. But I think when you love it and when you know you love something, you do it regardless. And I
yeah.
think that's what Fashion Week was for me. Like it was a massive moment in my career, but it was also a pro bono thing, other than walking
Mm,
the runway that was paid. But like up to that, all of the fittings, all of the content I created for Hair and Care, the charity, like it was because I love it and it shows. And I don't know, when you lose your why, which I think I did lose my way like for a good couple of years. I don't know. I think I'm more me now than I ever have been, and it's understanding that just please, if you get into this, stay your true self. There will be seasons, but it's about having the right people around you, definitely.
yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. What advice would you give to someone who's listening to this and is interested in sort of becoming someone like you? And by that I mean a disabled person who's interested in some sort of content creation, whether that's blogs, whether it's TikTok or, a YouTube channel, whatever it is, but they want to make it about them and their disability. What advice would you give them?
I think it's about just doing it. And I know that's kind of very top line, but I think what I mean by that is I remember when I first started on TikTok in August 2020, I filmed 7 videos and I thought I'm going to post one a day and it's going to be great. I learned how to edit because I worked at the BBC and I spent hours on my MacBook like doing it. And I just thought to myself, like, no, I'm going to post 3 a day. I'm going to do this and I'm going to not stop
Wow.
posting. And everyone around me, like my mom, my sister, Ollie, they were like, you've got 7 videos, Lou. That means you'll have to like film in 2 days. I'm like, yeah, but there's the algorithms now and this is the time now. And I think everyone thought I was mad, but I did it. And I just kept going and going and going and seeing the kind of prize, if you like, being the fact that I really wanted a platform, I wanted a voice, I wanted to change things. And also, I did it because traditional broadcast media, it wasn't necessarily commissioning me. TikTok and YouTube were the places where I felt home and they gave me a chance before even I gave myself a chance, really. So to be honest, I think it's consistency, just doing it, understanding that my first video that's probably still up on YouTube is absolutely awful. And that's okay. Don't enlist it or anything. I think it's beautiful to have the whole spectrum of yourself up there. And also understanding that just because you're blind doesn't mean you can't edit a video. Like there's so many people on TikTok now that are doing it and the iPhone is so accessible. And also I talk to BBC colleagues who are also blind and we'll say like we do know like where to have your background clear, to like know where a light source is, to not be backlit. There's
Mm,
like several different things that you can control. Even though like you don't necessarily know exactly where the camera is, I have this app all of the time called Ira, and I ring them and I have like 20 minutes a month, and it does the job. Like I also have an access worker and things, but I think just to start with like top line advice is just get on there, do it, have the vision of like write down what you want to create. I remember like going on and just kind of waffling in my videos, and that was fab in like 2014. But I think now it's like having those points written down and being very intentional with it. And, I had headlines written down on my phone that I had for like a good year before, and I was like, I have to do something with this creative energy because it's kind of eating me up inside. And I
Mhm.
think never think what if. I think with social media, one day I was Lucy without a platform, and then the next day, well, it was a couple of months, but yeah, it was like then suddenly I was Lucy with 1 million followers, and it can just happen like that if you're intentional.
That is such good advice. It's making me feel very guilty about all of the content ideas I have written on my phone that I desperately want to do. So I promise I will also take that advice and try to get a bit back more into it. But honestly, I just want to say a huge, huge thank you, Lucy, for coming on the podcast, sharing these incredible experiences that you've worked incredibly hard for. And I absolutely love as, consumer of your content. So if anyone is not following you, I highly suggest that they do that.
Thank you so much, my love. I really appreciate the time. And yeah, I really love talking to you. Thank you so much, and good luck with the rest of your show.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Wheelchair Activist. If you want to stay up to date and catch all of our previous episodes, you can find them all on my website, thewheelchairactivist.com. You can also follow me on social media at emma.vogelman on most platforms. And if you'd like to support the podcast, our links to the GoFundMe and Buy Me a Coffee are in this episode description. Your support in whatever form means the absolute world to us, and I'm so excited to bring you another episode next month. See you then.